Good afternoon, and welcome to our show. We have a wonderful lineup for you today, and both of our guests are not just authors, but they are incredible women who have faced challenges that we all read about, hear about, and may have experienced ourselves or know of a loved one who has. We're talking about losing a husband and losing him by telephone, a shock phone call, hearing that you have lost your beloved, your partner in life. And we have with us Jane Blaufus, and she is the author of With the Stroke of a Pen, Claiming Your Life. She's going to talk to us about her book, her personal life experience, and as a professional advisor, mentor in the life insurance industry, she's going to share with us tips and walk us through how to handle the financials when we lose our spouse. I'd like to welcome Jane. Hello, Jane.
Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm very good, Jane. Thank you for being on my show. I have your book, which I have read, and it is absolutely incredible. And I must say, it was very well written. You wrote this book straight from your heart, and your experiences are expressed very clearly. Jane, I'd like to ask you to tell our listeners a little bit about when you lost your husband, that personal drop inside that you felt that led you to writing and creating this hands-on book of tips and directives for those who may not really know about all of their life insurance derogatives. They might not know everything that's in the paperwork. Perhaps their husband has totally taken care of all the finances. So if you could tell our listeners a little bit about your book, and we'll go through and highlight some primary areas, but a little bit about that shock and what and how you were led to write your book.
Well, when you receive news that your 39-year-old husband that walked out the door in the morning had been killed in an accident, and you're left suddenly with down a widow with a 12-and-a-half-year-old daughter, nothing prepares you in life for that. There's no way that you can prepare for that. And I, as you mentioned earlier, have been in the life insurance industry for a number of years, and I foolishly thought that because of my experience, both hands-on with working with clients who had experienced a similar type of catastrophe, and also my education and all of the things that I knew firsthand, I thought that if anything ever happened to me, I'd be able to get through it better than anybody else would. Well, wrong. When you're face down in the dirt trying to pick yourself up, the last thing you want to have to do is pick yourself up financially as well as emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically. So I thought if with everything I knew and with all my experience, I could have been blindsided as badly as I was, I thought, what does the average person go through? You know, you've already referred to it, Susan, that there are still, unfortunately, in this day and age, a lot of women that don't know what goes on in the house financially. I just recently talked to a lady who had come out of a marriage after 22 years of being financially abused because her husband had total control over all of the finances in the house, and she didn't have any money. She had no access to it. She didn't know where anything was. So I wanted to. It took me a little while. It took me about 5 years to realize what I needed to do. And I finally realized I needed to write a book to help other people and other families not to have to go through what we went through. And I'm very proud to say that my daughter, who was 12 and a half at the time and is now 25, actually authored her own chapter in the book, Daddy's Little Girl.
Very nice. And Jane, you know, when I picked up your book and I read the title, With the Stroke of a Pen, Claim Your Life, how did you come up with that title? It's very catching.
Well, when you think about it, Susan, what is the one unique thing that we're always asked for as we go through our life? What's the one unique thing that's always required when we sign any legal document or put anything and any major decisions into play? Think about signing a will, signing a life insurance application, a mortgage for your home, anything, any of the monumental decisions that we make in our lifetime. You always have to sign on the so-called dotted line. So I decided that with the stroke of a pen, which each time you write your name and you take charge of one more area of both your personal and your financial planning life, in my mind, with the stroke of that pen, you claim your life.
And Jane, how will this book help people to prepare properly for those financial decisions and for this life-changing event when you do find yourself without your spouse?
Well, I think, Susan, you probably know as well as I do that people don't sit around on Friday night over the dinner table and talk about what happens if I become ill or die tonight. It's like the elephant in the room. North America, there seems to be this taboo about talking about somebody dying. Don't talk to me about dying because it just might happen. So unfortunately, what a lot of people do, because they are so fearful of the topic, they basically bury their head in the sands and think, oh, well, it won't happen to me. Well, one of the reasons I did this book is because I want to dispel that myth. So I'm hoping that with giving people a roadmap to follow to help them to start to have courageous conversations, first and foremost with themselves, then with their loved ones and their families, and then engaging in conversation with the people that are necessary to help put life insurance in place when it is needed, not if it is needed, having a proper legally drawn up will in place, making sure that your tax affairs are in the proper order, and also pre-planning your funeral. My husband wouldn't talk to me about what his wishes were because he was 39. He flew fast jet planes in the Air Force, and he drove fast motorcycles, and he thought he was immortal. So when he died, I didn't know what any of his final wishes were and made some of the most excruciatingly painful decisions of my adult life. So I'm hoping that the book is done in such a way where there's no industry jargon, it's all in layman's terms, and it's just thought-provoking questions, and it's a way to give people a map to start the conversations they need to have with the appropriate professionals.
And I think it's very good. It's right on target. You do say in your book, Jane, that you need 3 important people in your life to do this planning work. You need an excellent financial advisor of whom you truly trust and you develop a rapport with, not when something happens and you need to reach out to find someone. It's not the time to look for someone new. You need to look at these milestones in your life, and you need to prepare, and you need an excellent accountant, a lawyer, and you need an excellent insurance advisor, so that in the event, as you expressed in your book, and you went through and explained how you went through the trials and how you came up with the decisions, and you have various parts at the end of each chapter, key takeaways. And I find it very interesting because your book does explain, talk to your partner and or your family about what you want for your funeral. Better yet, work with a funeral home to pre-arrange it. I found that very interesting because as you go through your book, you give tips on what to be aware of, what thoughts to have, and how to get your mind in that place of thought so that you can follow through and make these plans ahead of time. And your book also goes through at the end of each chapter different keys that are appropriate to that chapter. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with the you made a very important slogan in your book, and you talked about talking to your employer about the type of insurance, short-term disability insurance, structured return to work programs. tell our audience a little bit about what you discovered and what those programs are.
Well, many people in North America have group insurance, group benefits plan, be they medical, dental, whatever, and also EAP, which is known as an employee assistance program. And after my husband died, of course, I was thrown into just the absolute chaos that followed his death. And when I called my employer on the Monday morning to tell them what had happened, they explained to me that there were certain things in my coverage that would help me to get through the coming months. One was I had immediately 5 days of what is called bereavement leave, where I was allowed to sort of, get through funeral arrangements, get through the funeral and whatever. And then there are programs in place such as short-term disability. I'm not exactly sure if your listeners realize I'm speaking to you from Canada, but there are commonalities between both Canada and the U.S. There are things like short-term disability, long-term disability, and as you mentioned, a structured return to work program. My employer was fabulous. My employer worked with me and helped me to put a structured return to work. I went back to work 6 weeks after he died, but I only went back 2 hours a day for the first little while, and I gradually worked myself up to full-time. He was killed in July, and by the following January, I was back to work full-time. But it's critical that you understand and educate yourself as to what it is that your employer's group plan actually offers. It's not time, and back to your comment about it's so important that you build relationships with people beforehand. It's also important that you're self-educated. It's incumbent upon us as individuals to take charge and to claim our life. So ignorance is not, an excuse when it comes to something like this. So it's very important that you understand. And if you don't know, ask questions. Most companies have fabulous people on staff who are there to answer your questions.
And Jane, for our listeners, knowing what you know now, and had you known you were going to lose your husband that very night, what type of conversations would you have started to have, say, on a Friday night when you're all home together? What type of questions would you tell our listeners they may want to start? Open up a conversation.
Well, as I mentioned to you, Susan, I repeatedly tried to have the conversation with him as to what were his wishes if anything was to happen and he was to die before I did. But he always turned the conversation back around to me, and it was always a conversation about if I went. I think what I would have done in hindsight, I know what I would have done in hindsight, is I would have not backed off. I would have pushed.
Okay.
I would have really demanded that he tell me what he wanted, because I couldn't decide for 3 months after he died if I wanted peas or carrots with dinner when somebody asked me. Yet there I was making these monumental decisions, and I was making them blindly. And it's very hard because you try to do right by your loved ones after they've gone, but if they won't tell you what they want, they almost put you in a position where they hand tie you, and they leave you doubting yourself. Because I didn't want to involve my daughter in a lot of stuff because she was only 12 and a half. I did engage her in a couple of the decisions, but for the most part, I made them by myself. And you go to bed at night and you lie there in the dark, wide awake, thinking, was that the right thing to do? Was it the wrong thing? Is that what he would have wanted? So in hindsight, I would have pushed harder because I knew everything that was going on in the house financially, but that was the one thing I didn't, and it caused me a lot of angst.
And can you tell our listeners, looking at, you knew your husband had a life insurance policy?
Yep.
Okay. For our listeners, there may be many out there, Jane, that perhaps their husband just takes care of everything and perhaps it's working very well for them. But in looking ahead and being sure that you're emotionally somewhat prepared, we're never totally prepared for these these tragic events, but however, saying that, knowing there is a life insurance policy in place, but not sure what it actually means should something happen, what would you like to say to our listeners as far as conversations or questions with their spouse to bring up this information and to really look at it and review it together?
Well, I would put that on the table, that you would like, as the spouse, to know what is going on in the event that something happens and it's too late to ask questions. I would highly encourage people to ask, to be brought in. What I find, just let me back up for a minute, what I've found too many times is that one of the spouses in the house takes care of the financial affairs and wants to spare the other person having to deal with that. That's not the way to do it. Back to your earlier comment, it's very important to build a trustworthy relationship with whoever your insurance advisor is before the fact. Starting to deal with someone you don't know from Adam is not the time to do it after someone is gone. I say in the book, 77% of women fire their husband's financial advisor within 3 years of death because they had no prior relationship with them. If it wasn't for my advisor and the trust I had in him and the faith I put in him, I don't know what I would have done, because I was ahead of the game because I understood all about the insurance in place. So if you don't know, ask questions. It's educating yourself so that you understand. And the other thing too is life insurance is for the living. It is for those that are left behind, to help them not to have to bear the financial burden as well as the emotional burden of losing someone. So if I can get one thing across today, life insurance is for the people that are left behind. So make sure that you understand what it can do for you.
And Jane, your life insurance policy, working with your advisor, what did you find were critical turning points in your policy that supported and helped you to move forward with less pain than if you had no policy in place?
Well, I couldn't have done it if there wasn't any life insurance in place. There is no way I could have made it through, because I needed that financial safety net, because we'd lost a second income in the family. My daughter was going to private school at the time. I had to be able to keep up the mortgage payments, her school payments. I had to keep the car running and everything else about it. And when you suddenly lose another income, that's when you realize actually how much you depended upon that income. So I think it's critical for people to also understand what a major part two incomes play in one household, and what it means if one of those incomes. Try to do a budget just off one of the two incomes. Use either or and see what the end result is like. So because my life insurance was in place, it had been issued, we had kept up with the premiums, I knew the beneficiary designations were correct. After everything happened and all the paperwork was filed, I was actually very fortunate to have the claims paid out very quickly and without any hitches.
Very good. You also mentioned in your book, I found this very, very important and very insightful, that when you were trying to get through the emotionals, you had a great deal of support from your family, and you also allowed for this open communication with you and your daughter for her to be expressing her feelings. She was not real happy about the counseling individual that she met with and that she had a session with, but you kept those doors open. How did you help her, Jane, to open up and talk about her emotions?
Well, as you said, the counselor wasn't doing anything for her, so we made an agreement that if she wouldn't go back to the counselor, she had to talk to me. So it wasn't easy, Susan, because I, of course, was struggling with my own grief, but I started to make myself become very in tune and aware of her mood swings, her changes. The thing with her that usually sort of indicated to me that she was in trouble, she started to get, I would call it spinning like a top. She'd start to just talk really quickly. Her words would come out. She'd ramble. She'd be jumbled. I would physically watch her get irritated, uptight, whatever. And as hard as it was for me, because all you want to do as a mother, especially after your child's lost one of their parents, is wrap your arms around them and not cause them any more pain.
Right.
I had to push her. I had to push her until the dam broke. And once the dam broke, then she would let it out. She would usually cry and whatever. And when we were finished, we'd both usually be hanging off each other in tears, but usually laughing about something, because I'd try to bring it around to a good thought at the end. But it was critical to her getting better that she had somebody to talk to. And there were days, quite honest, when she was more the parent than I was.
I'm sure. And it's very interesting how we try to help one another. Children also try to bear their parents' pain because they feel for the parent as well. And it is very common, Jane, for children and parents to shift those roles. It does happen. It's quite normal. And it's interesting the way you helped your daughter. You helped your daughter get through this probably one of the most difficult moments in her life, because losing someone you love, especially a parent, is crucially painful and devastating. And you mentioned something else very, very important, Jane. You also said that every year, when I was reading your book, that every year you reviewed your life insurance policy with your financial advisor to update and to make sure that in the event, something were to occur, that everything was at the proper levels so that there would not be any issues. And I found that very insightful, and I found that excellent advice. As your book also, all throughout your book, you have combined your personal elements, you've combined your professional expertise, and you have shared truly from your heart the trauma and the way that it has led you to surviving this ordeal. And after all of these years, Jane, is there anything that you can think of to tell our listeners that you may have done differently? And if not, that's okay. Is there anything you'd like to add that they would need to know about planning?
Yes, I would, actually. Because further to your comment, it's imperative that you review your life insurance on a yearly basis to make sure that it's still doing the job it was intended to do. Because often people buy a life insurance policy, stick it in a drawer, and they only pull it out at when it's too late to do anything about it. In hindsight, believe it or not, I wish there had been more life insurance in place. I wasn't left a princess, I wasn't left a pauper, but in hindsight, even though I was in the business, I wish now there had actually been some more in place. There's a rule of thumb that's gone on for years and years in the insurance business, and most people don't realize this, but the average person buys life insurance 7 times in the course of their lifetime. And that's due to changes in their status, going from single to married, married to home, home to a child, better job, increase. So, there are major life events that necessitate a review of coverage to make sure that it's still doing the job it was intended to do.
So we still want to make sure that we are taking a look at our life and our changes and going to our insurance to make sure that we have proper coverage. And as far as additional coverage, I have to agree with you there. I've been reading a great deal about life insurance and finding that getting the maximum coverage, not worrying about your premiums that you have to pay out every month. Yes, we all have budgets, but do your very best to strive for as much as you can, because as you said, you wish you had done more.
Yep.
So, but I do thank you for sharing your story. I thank you for the time that you took to write this incredible book. In the back, listeners, it has some courageous questions to ask yourself. It is a master list and checklist, and it allows you and helps you to think through all of these areas. And Jane's book, once again, With the Stroke of a Pen, Claim Your Life by Jane Blaufus. Jane, thank you so much for being a guest on my show. And I just wish you joy and happiness. Onward, you and your family. Thank you again.
Thank you, Susan. And just so that your listeners know, the book can only be purchased through our website, which is www.theblaufus.group.com. Thank you, Susan, for allowing me to be on your show. It's been an honor.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us at Heart to Heart. We will